My name is Patrick Reynolds. I am the Director of Public Programs here.
Great.
How about gives us a hand for Al Sisti?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks a lot for coming. This means a lot to me. And thanks to Patrick and Rebecca and the great people here at this great organization for inviting me. I'm a proud member, and I will be forever, or until I die. I'm rooting for forever. Yeah, we're here to talk about John Devereux, incredibly influential Irish pioneer, and for the most part, fairly undersung. He wasn't even elected to Utica's History Hall of Fame until 2003, 200 years after he came to Utica. That's a little late. But anyways, we're trying to change all that. All right, so one of the first questions you might ask, how does this influential Irishman have such a French name? And it comes from the Devereux family way back in time. We're going to say like no more than 1,000 years back from now. But they come from a region of France in Normandy called Devereux. And in French, of means is de. So he had Devereux, which means from Vereux. And so that's where the name Devereux came from. And now to set some context for how they got from France to Wales to Ireland to America and to Utica. Not in real time. I'll try and skip some stuff here. So as part of the Norman Conquest in 1066, the Devereux boys were knights and fighters and came to the aid of William the Conqueror, and as a result were granted land in Wales. It was called a knight's fee. A knight's fee wasn't money, it was land befitting a knight, enough land to put on a knight's estate. And these were two of the brothers, Walter and William. Now, Walter had two sons, Robert and Edward. You may have heard the name Devereux from a different point of view. Robert Devereux was Queen Elizabeth I's boyfriend, or consort, until she had him beheaded. That put a damper on the relationship for sure. But the other son, Edward, is where the Irish family came off. So 100 years later, the Norman invasion of Ireland, so Dermot MacMurrough, who was the deposed king of Leinster during one of their many wars, he had requested help from Wales to regain his kingship and promised land to anyone who would help him. One of the big names, if you know Irish history, Strongbow is a real big name in Irish history. But anyways, Richard de Clare answered the call. They helped regain his throne, and true to his word, he awarded land to Sir Philip Devereux in Wexford, which is where the Devereux still live in Ireland. So much time passed. So this is the Devereux from Wexford. This Devereux is one of those weird names where you can't pluralize and make possessives without a disagreement. So they lived in land, an area called the Lep. Even though it's spelled Leap, it's the Lep near Enniscorthy. And from 1100, those many generations, they kept marrying Irish women, as my father did. And so the word was, it passed through the family that they became more Irish than the Irish themselves. And one of the later ones, now we're around 1750-ish, to Thomas of the Lep. Now, so Thomas is the one who started the Devereux Cornish line that led, Cornish line, I just got that. That led to, kind of created John C. Devereux. So Thomas Devereux married Catherine Cornish, I'm going to say around 1770. Their first son was Walter, then James. I had to keep the font small, and you'll see why. John Cornish Devereux, Margaret Devereux, Mary Devereux, Thomas Devereux, Catherine Devereux, Luke Devereux, and the baby Nicholas Devereux. Yeah, right? And they lived a comfortable life at the Lep on their estate with their horses and their parties and their blacksmith until 1798, when this thing called the Irish Rebellion of 1798 happened. And since most of it, well, very, very briefly, this is a topic for a whole presentation in its own. The aim was to bring Catholics, Protestants, and Presbyterians together to provide a united front against British oppression, to try and overthrow the British rule. It was organized by Theopold Wolfe-Tone and Henry Joy McCracken, and most of the fighting did take place in Wexford. And the Devereux gave it their full-throated support financially and with their blood. And they had some early victories in Wexford, so they decided to make one last push, the ultimate battle against the British at Vinegar Hill. That did not go well. Even though they outnumbered the British 2-1, they fought with pikes, long sticks with sharpened, and the British didn't. And they were expecting support from the French. That never showed up, so they were soundly defeated. As a result, the Devereux, with their full-throated support, lost most of their land. Thomas, the father, was imprisoned. He eventually died within a few months. Walter, the oldest brother, had a price on his head, and he escaped injury and death in the battle, but because he had a price on his head, he scurried off to Martinique, they believe, disguised himself on a ship, and was never heard from again. The brother James was killed, so what about John? John was not a fighter. He had gone to France in 1796 to learn how to dance and play the fiddle. From France, he arrived in America in about 1797, set up a dancing school in Connecticut, then moved to Schenectady and Troy, and he's rumored to have said, when all was said and done, "I danced $1,000 out of the Yanks." And with that, he began to parlay that into his financial success. So around 1802, he came to Utica, but first he went to Albany, clerked in a store run by a friend of his, and gained the experience he needed. He thought he needed to run his own store. He came west, went to Rome because he heard that Lynchville, Rome, was the place to be. It was the growing place. But Dominic Lynch only wanted to lease the land in Rome, which he did a lot, if you know anything about Dominic Lynch. That didn't appeal to John Devereux, so he came to Utica and set up. And he set up near the Bag Square area, which is really where Utica was. That's where the hub was, because it was right by it was the old Fort Schuyler. It was right by the fording place of the Mohawk River. There was a stagecoach around there. There was even a dirt road to Albany. So that was the place to set up. So he started out with just, what they did in Albany. He had a dry goods and grocery business next to Baggs Hotel, placement, location. And then later expanded to include whiskey, gin, wine, brandy, cigars, tobacco, and it was to sell to the general public, but also to the taverns and the businesses and the hotels that were in the area. He was a very smart man, a real visionary. And besides the goods he sold, which were nothing but the best, Moses Bagg wrote, "He had energy, shrewdness, and industry, a temper most generous, a tongue that was persuasive and fluent, and manners benignant and polished. These brought him quick custom and ensured his success from the outset." So in other words, he had the gift of gab, he had Irish confidence, and he wasn't bad looking. So his store became a major hub in the state. It would become a place where imports from New York City could be sold and distributed, and it was also an assembly point for those who wanted to, who were going west and needed to be stocked. He brought his brothers in later and got in and out of the business as he got married or he was huge into land speculation, so he was buying a lot of land. Again, the visionary. He knew what was going to last over time. And if he saw land, he bought it. And his brother Nicholas was probably even more influential and more speculative. Nicholas at one point owned about 400,000 acres in New York State, going out to Buffalo. He's the one who donated land and money to start St. Bonaventure College. He was an incredible guy. And he was voted to the Hall of Fame here in 2010, I just noticed. Well deserved. So when when Mr. Devereux had his store, when he set up, he was competing against two other stores. There wasn't all that many buildings in Utica at the time, but those stores went out and he persevered, and so did his wallet. And before long, he was doing about $100,000 a year in business, which is about $1 million today. So now we're up to 1812. At the end of 1812, the war is over. He and his brothers built a new brick store on the west side of Bag Square, and by 1819, the stretch of the Erie Canal from Utica to Rome was completed. So he, again, very smart, that's the way the traffic was going to go. Not the Mohawk River, not the stagecoaches, So he built a building right on the Erie Canal. And I don't know if you've seen, where the Devereux Block was on Oriskany Street and Genesee Street, but in that picture on the right, if you look carefully, you can see the reflection right off the Erie Canal of the building. It's pretty impressive. Over the bridge. So again, location, location, location. Now the Devereux Block stayed there. It actually was standing till 1990 when it was torn down after, I think, a fire in the 1980s. Just gorgeous building that we drove by a million times and probably never even noticed. So some fast facts. He was married the first time to Ellen Berry from Albany. Now, I said that he stopped at a friend's store and worked there for a couple of years. I believe that was, Thomas Berry owned a store in Albany. He was also the first trustee of St. Mary's Church in Albany, where John Devereux was also a trustee. So I'm presuming that he married her around the time, or met her around the time he was working at the store. Anyway, she died in 1813. He was already up here by then. Then he married Mary Rice Colt in 1815 from Paterson, New Jersey, and they're also in the Colt 45 line. So, again, money. Now, John Devereux never had any children with either wife, although he and Mary Colt adopted an Ellen, who I believe was Mary Colt's niece from New Jersey, and another John C. Devereux, which doesn't help our quest for John C. Devereux's grave, and you'll see that in a bit, who was his brother Thomas and Mary Redmond's son. Now, to his homes. He first lived on Main Street, and again, as close as that is to the river, that was the main street in Utica. And then from there, he moved to Whitesboro, the corner of Whitesboro and Hotel Street. Then he built a mansion in 1812 on the northeast corner of Broad Street and 2nd, where he lived till 1848. The top photo, Super Sleuth Mary Pat from here found this photo of his mansion from, I think, 1950, someone took it. That turned into the Lowry brothers, and it was torn down in 1972. It kills me to say that. Urban renewal, man. All the stuff we lost. And it's now the home of J.M. Dorr. All right, so it was on the corner of Broad and 2nd, but where? So here's the picture for 1950 that Mary Pat found. You can see there's a boulder in the left side of the building. Aha, a boulder. So if we can find the boulder in this 1950 photo and overlay it over the boulder in this recent folder, and then perform some tech magic, don't worry, Hollywood's not going to call me out of Utica. what the? Yeah. So you can actually see how close it was to the corner. The stone still is there. I'll talk about that in the next slide. So besides all the stuff he did, and this doesn't even touch on his philanthropy. He gave and he gave and he gave, and he founded the Utica Hibernian Benevolent Society in 1822 to help pave the way for Irish laborers coming over to work on the canal or the railroads, to help them not have to clear the hurdles that he had to clear when he came in 20 years earlier. In fact, I was doing some research here on the Irish organizations in the Mohawk Valley, and I saw this one, which at the time, excuse me, was the earliest one I found, 1822, and I'm like, whoa, 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 it's 2022 now, we should do something. So we had a bicentennial gala, we had a really nice dinner program, history write-ups of all the Irish organizations in Utica. We got letters from President Biden, President Higgins from Ireland, and everyone in between. It was really nice. But besides all that, he co-founded St. John's Church and the Savings Bank of Utica. Yeah. So before 1819, there was no Catholic church west of Albany, and Devereux, who was a devout Catholic and was also rich enough to drive to Albany for Sunday Mass, would go to Albany, St. Mary's in Albany. I know. I did the math. At 4 miles an hour to go from here to Albany. You know, I like God and all, but... So Devereux convinced the priest at St. Mary's to come to Utica and perform a Mass there. He hosted the Mass at his home, that mansion, and in 1813. So maybe 120 years later, this Catholic group called the Order of Alhambra recognized that event and put this beautiful plaque up on a boulder that's on the corner of Broad and Second to this day. Maybe he got tired of driving to Albany. There was no church west of Albany. And so a corporation was formed called the First Catholic Church in the Western District of New York, which became St. John's. And in 1821, the first church was built, and it was moved 2 more times to the point where it's the beautiful historic Old St. John's now, which opened in 1869. By the way, this drawing, Nicholas Devereux, his oldest daughter Hannah, who married Francis Kernan, another very influential Utican, she drew this. So yeah, enough for the talent, people. And if you go to St. John's today, you can still see the influence of the Devereux brothers. There's 2 portraits when you walk in the vestibule. Father Tom actually brought down this little table, I think to torture me, because I asked if we could have it for our Irish museum. He just brought it down to show me that this was ostensibly the altar that they said the Mass on at that first Mass. And that still exists at St. John's. Okay, now the Savings Bank of Utica. So as Irish laborers started to make money on the Erie Canal, they needed a safe place to store their money. They didn't really trust banks. There was always the threat of other laborers stealing their money. There was the threat of taverns where they could spend their money to their chagrin of their wives. And soldiers and contractors coming back home after the War of 1812. They didn't trust banks, but they knew that they could trust the Devereux brothers. And so when the Devereux built their new brick building on Genesee Street, they had put in an iron strongbox to hold the store's proceeds. And the laborers would give them their money to hold. The Devereux, in turn, would invest it and pay them dividends. This is in 1819. That's amazing. And the strongbox still exists at the Savings Bank of Utica. So that's pretty cool. So yeah, in 1818, they had so much money in the box that they needed to do something, so they started the bank. They applied for a charter. It was granted but never activated because once that stretch of the Erie Canal got finished, laborers moved on. But eventually, getting through a financial crisis and a cholera outbreak, the population did increase, the money did increase, so they reapplied for the charter, and then it was granted, and they did become an official banking institution. And the Devereux brothers were both there, front and center. So, what are the things that he did besides all that? All right, I told you he's the trustee of St. Mary's Church in Albany. He hosted the first Catholic Mass. He was the commissioner of public charities, the co-founder of St. John's. I told you about the Utica Hibernian Benevolence Association. Yeah, this is pretty cool. So 200 years ago this year, he hosted the first St. Patrick's Day dinner and the first St. Patrick's Day parade. He was the first Grand Marshal, led the parade for 24 years until he died. Any postings you see of the St. Patrick's Day parade, they're calling it the 200th anniversary, so that's why. And that's the only thing I have in common with John Devereux. We were both Grand Marshals. I have vision too, but he founded the first Catholic cemetery too. In 1830, there was no Catholic cemetery. They were buried in potter's grounds or on church grounds. And he donated land on Steuben, Elm, Grove Place, and even reserved a spot for himself on there and the other Devereux, but he was never buried there. That's another great story. When the city decided to put Addington Place as a new street, they moved up to 600, the remains of 600 Irish men and women from that cemetery, moved them to St. Agnes in one fell swoop. And there's a really nice monument at St. Agnes for that too. But I mean, just thinking of the logistics of how they did that. And he was the president of the Utica branch of the United States Bank. He established the first Catholic orphanage. The Savings Bank of Utica. He was the first elected mayor of Utica in 1839 and up to 1840. The Common Council would appoint mayor. But as of 1840, the state had a referendum on the elections that said all cities' mayors had to be elected from now on. So they had a special election in March, and this immigrant was the first elected mayor by the people. Pretty impressive. And he was a trustee of St. Agnes Cemetery, where he eventually ended up. And other stuff. Regarding the Hibernian Temperance Society, so temperance and abstinence became a big national thing. But again, Devereux was very smart. Temperance is watch what you drink, watch how much you drink. Abstinence was don't drink anything. He noted that there was 40 breweries in Utica, money-making breweries. The Erie Canal laborers were actually paid during the day to fortify them and keep them happy, not just Irish. So he was vice president of the Temperance Society, but wouldn't have any part of the Abstinence Society. As he's getting older, he and his brother were still doing land speculation. This is a really cool thing. I was downstairs doing research with Super Sleuth Mary Pat, and I wanted to see some documents written by Devereux, in his own hand. They brought me out, I think Patrick brought me out a box and let me go through it, and here's a deed from John Devereux with his signature. I'm holding a piece of paper that John Devereux held. For a deed for a land purchase for $1,000 from the widow of General Alexander Hamilton. I'm like, Eliza Hamilton? I'm holding something that Eliza. So she did own a lot of land on Devereux Street, as a matter of fact. And when that was pointed out to me, I'm like, oh yeah, Hamilton Street is right off Devereux Street, and Schuyler Street's right at the end of it. So that's pretty cool. Then he retired to his 400-acre farm, which is around the corner of Mohawk and Bleecker, but 400 acres, it's got to be bigger than that. And he came home to die in December of 1848 and left an estate worth roughly $17 million today. And he was buried on the grounds of the Sisters of Mercy behind St. John's Church. And here's just a few of the things that people said about him. But the intent, my intent, and the intent of this building and this organization is to preserve history before it's lost, so that it's never lost. So yes, we have the Ancient Order of Hibernians is a John C. Devereux Division I. There's the Devereux Block. There's a couple of, gosh, I have a few pictures of the Devereux Bar and Tavern in here, don't I? And there's Devereux Street. Devereux Street, by the way, is named after Nicholas and not John, so he got screwed out of that too. So here's a couple special projects we've undertaken at the H.A.R.P Museum. The first one is we wanted to get a historical blue marker put up at the site of his mansion next to the boulder to recognize all the things. I can't even say all the things he did. I can say all the things that would fit on a sign in 5 lines of 27 characters. These are the words we eventually settled on and were approved. And then a gravesite, we're calling it the Shamrock Ceremony as part of the Grand Marshal week leading up to the St. Patrick's Day Parade. So a little bit about the historical marker program. It's led by it's funded by the William G. Pomeroy Foundation, and we put in an application or a letter of intent a couple of years ago. They gave us some advice, told us some things we couldn't do, we were putting things like great Irishman and a friend to all, and they said, no, that's qualitative. You have to be, and this is something, you really got to want to do this if you're going to try and get a sign. They don't hand them out like Pez. You have to provide what they call primary documentation, which is not a quote from Judge Walsh's book or a page from Wikipedia. To prove that he founded St. John's Church, we had to come up with a copy of the Articles of Incorporation to prove that and a lot of things we couldn't do, to prove that he created the first cemetery. He donated land. But we got enough done with the help of some great historians in Utica. Joe Kelly, I'm going to forget someone. Joe Kelly, Lou Parada, Joe Bettini, Kevin Schultz, Mary Patrick. If I forgot someone, I apologize. Phil Bean. Anyways, they all helped to come up. Brian Adey from Joe Griffo's office. They all helped to come up with this documentation. We sent it in. They said, it's accepted, but the trustees don't like putting a marker up where the building doesn't exist anymore. I'm like, oh, crap. But, they said, our historian has done some research, and did you know there's an Irish Cultural Center in Utica, New York? Do tell. Well, it's not J.M. Doerr's parking lot, but yeah, I suppose. So yeah, that's the good luck. So they sent us a check. We sent a check to the foundry to do it, and we're hoping to get it in the next couple of months. We're going to have a heck of a ceremony because 2024 is also his 250th birthday. I know, I missed the 200th. I'm not going to miss this one. So, it's there. You can't tell, it's in the middle. It's going to be right between the 2 main entrances. It's too bad it's blue because it blends right in there. Maybe we'll paint the building. And the second thing we're doing is that, so again, he started the St. Patrick's Day Parade. He was the Grand Marshal for 24 years, and Moses Bagg wrote, Utica's chief Irishman, John C. Devereux, always headed the marchers wearing a green sash and sporting a genuine shamrock from the old sod in his buttonhole. So when I was the Grand Marshal in 2022, I said, wouldn't it be cool to start a tradition where we can place shamrocks on his grave to start the week, celebrating this great man and what he did. Okay, where's his grave? So this is where he was supposed to be. He was supposed to be buried in that old burial ground on Steuben Street, but he never was. When he died, which is a good time to bury someone in retrospect, I don't know why I wrote that. He was buried on the grounds of Sisters of Charity outside St. John's Church, and then was reinterred to St. Agnes, but I didn't know when or why. But, piece of cake. I just go to St. Agnes and find it. Where's my fellow researcher who did all that? Yeah, you know. Okay, there's no less than 5 or 6 John C. Devereux. And here's another thing. Yeah, here's another thing. For the same ethnicity that has the imagination to write some of the greatest literature and poems and songs, where's the imagination when it comes to naming your kids? It's got to be the same. It's not fair, I tell you. All right, so which one is John C. Devereux? All right, so here's my nomenclature to keep track. JCD 1 is our John C. Devereux. He's the mayor, the son of Thomas and Catherine Koresh. JCD 2 was the one he adopted, his son, his brother Thomas and Mary Redmond's son. JCD 3 was Nicholas's son. That's the one that we found that was the really beautiful headstone. He was also quite an influential Utican too. JCD 4 was an infant son of JCD 3 and Ellen Jenkins. 5 was a grandson of Nicholas Devereux. And then this one was from a different Devereux altogether, but apparently he wanted to be buried here. But he's not part of the Koresh line. I got to change that too. So we don't count him. So 1 down. So process of elimination. This is the beautiful stone that we found. This is nearest the chapel. This is the Devereux who died in 1884. So he's not our John Devereux. This one was Devereux number 5. This was the grandson of Nicholas and Mary Dolber Devereux. So that's not ours. And the dates are on here too. This was the infant son, so that's not ours. And the other one was likely buried in Buffalo. So I conclude that this little cross is the final resting place of our John Koresh Devereux. And it's right next to his brother's line. So these are from left to right. Cornelia, his daughter, Mary Dolber Butler Devereux, and Nicholas Devereux, and then this cross that says John C. Devereux on it. Now, Nicholas died in 1858, so having this cross on the outside of a guy who died in 1848 and, was obviously interred after that, that makes sense that this would be his. Plus, Nicholas did have a son, John C. Devereux, but that was the nice stone I pointed out earlier, so that's not this one. And this modest marker is consistent with the kind of marker, the cross that would be on a church ground. And it's also consistent with what John Devereux seemed like he would have required or allowed. He wasn't a very ostentatious person. So, right or wrong, I'm leaning towards right, and I don't mean politically. Oh my God, I gotta change that one too. This is where I'm saying John Devereux Stone is, and therefore this is where the shamrock ceremony is going to be during parade week. And we went up there about a month ago to clean up because you could barely read it. But while we were there, we cleaned up Nicholas's and Mary's and Cornelia's too, with the help of some of our museum volunteers, past grand marshals, and Pat McGrath, who is the parade director and works and owns a funeral home. We cleaned it up. So this is how Devereux's marker looked like when we got there. Yeah, there's no resolution lost. That's how it looked. And this is what it looked like after the first cleanup, and we've done a couple cleanups since then. So I don't care. Short of digging him up, I'm saying that's his gravestone. And that's what I got. By the way, the Kernans have just a wealth of stories to tell, I'm sure. And hopefully we'll get someone to do a Nicholas Devereux and or Francis Kernan talk in the near future. Anything else? Yes?
I just want to say this, you've done one of the best talks that I've heard since I moved here.
Oh, well, thank you.
What you did today.
Thank you.
The research and everything.
Oh, thanks. That's ridiculous.
Thank you.